What up, everybody? As we're getting into the back half of the 90s on the BMF timeline, there's still one key member of the BMF organization that hasn't been introduced on the show, and that's none other than Chad Brown, aka J-Bo. And before I get any further, let me answer a question that I know a lot of people have. Was J Pusher based off J-Bo? And either though they both have J's at the beginning of their names, I definitely don't think so, because neither the timeline or the stories line up. J-Bo hadn't even met Meech yet until around this point in the timeline where they're at right now. In an interview with Vlad, he said it was in 1997 when he first met Meech. And also because J-Bo was never Meech's enemy, and he got indicted as part of the BMF indictment. Not to mention he's still alive today. So because there's so many differences between J Pusher and J-Bo, I don't think J Pusher was based off J-Bo. Meech also already had contacts in St. Louis before he met J-Bo. On his interview with Vlad, J-Bo said he was introduced to Meech through a mutual contact and originally went to Meech's house in Atlanta to gamble on video games. I believe he said Madden football, and it wasn't even about business at first. Then J-Bo started earning Meech's respect around the same time. They went to a club and Meech got into it with somebody, and J-Bo knocked him out. But they still weren't doing business together at this point because J-Bo still had his contact in St. Louis that he was getting his weight from. So basically this mutual contact was getting his weight from Meech and selling to other people, and one of them was J-Bo. Probably something else that earned Meech's respect about J-Bo is that he never tried to backdoor the mutual contact in St. Louis, like we saw J Pusher do. It wasn't until this contact ended up getting arrested when J-Bo turned to Meech to start getting product. So I think J-Bo will be introduced to Meech on the show through one of his current St. Louis contacts, either Carter or Kia. Right now Meech has Kia running point for him in the Lou, and Carter's her number 2. And he's also working with the Moors now that J Pusher's out the picture. But with that said, I can see Meech having a problem with the Moors anytime things aren't going smooth, because they already questioned him about leaving Kia in charge of his operation. So something will likely end up happening to Kia and possibly even Carter, to where J-Bo will start running point for Meech in St. Louis before ultimately becoming the underboss of the entire BMF organization. And with that said, even though I don't think J Pusher was supposed to be J-Bo, if J-Bo's character has been introduced to the series already, I think he's actually Carter and not Carter's brother J Pusher. Because if you look at the relationship that Meech has with Carter, it's already starting to become a relationship to where Carter is like a little brother figure to Meech. Keeping in mind that Meech saved Carter's life in Season 3 when Pusher was more worried about his reputation and going to war, ultimately costing Carter 2 of his fingers before Meech intervened. And because of that, in Season 4, when T was riding with Carter and Carter had had a few drinks, he was letting T know how much respect he had for Meech. And ultimately, Carter proved himself to Meech that he had his back and Kia's when he took his own brother's life to save them. Plus right now, if something happened to Kia, Carter would be next in line to start running point for Meech in the Lou. And if there's anybody in the series who's already been introduced that Meech would take under his wing like a little brother and make the junior boss of BMF, I can only see it being Carter. But something else to keep in mind concerning Carter potentially being J-Bo is that Carter started off the series as a baseball player who everybody thought was going to go pro. But because he lost those 2 fingers when the guys took him for ransom, he lost his baseball career. And even though J-Bo does have all his fingers as far as I know, at the same time he also said in that same Vlad interview that I mentioned before that he used to play sports, and I'm pretty sure he said he played baseball. And another potential clue that Carter could be based off J-Bo is, like I mentioned earlier, that J-Bo was into video games and first met Meech when he went to his house to gamble over Madden. Keep in mind when Meech and T went to J Pusher's house earlier in Season 4, he had a bunch of video game machines, and Carter was even pulling one in when Meech and T were over there. So depending on what happens in this series moving forward, only time will tell if Carter is J-Bo or if he's still to be introduced. But also keep in mind throughout the last couple seasons of the BMF series, key storylines have wrapped up about halfway to 3/4 way through the final episode of the season, and the remainder of the episode kind of sets the stage for things that are going to take place moving forward. So with that said, we could potentially see at the end of episode 10, Meech meeting J-Bo, or potentially something happen to Kia to where Carter might have to take over. And like how Meech and J-Bo were like family, like brothers, and how J-Bo was one of the closest people in Meech's life at the time of the BMF indictment. One of the other closest people in Meech's life at that point in time was somebody I really haven't talked too much about, his assistant named Yogi. And with that said, I think Yogi's been in front of our faces for a minute now, ever since season 2, and is being portrayed as Tina. Tina was introduced in season 2. She's one of Meech's baby mother Monique's cousins, also making her cousins with Zoe as well, and has been riding with Meech ever since he got to Atlanta. And at this point, she's the last remaining member of his Atlanta Day Ones that's not either dead or in prison. Yogi was someone who was with Meech all the way to the end, and when things ultimately went down in Atlanta, she drove him from Atlanta to Miami. And because the fact that Tina was cousins with Monique, Tina already looks up to Meech as an older brother figure in the same type of way that Carter does. And we also know that Tina will most likely survive season 4 because of the fact that she's seen in the funeral clip. Tina also plans on staying in the life and isn't going to be someone who gets out for the sake of a child, similar to why Roland got out the game. Keeping in mind earlier in season 4 when she got pregnant, she decided not to keep the baby because she didn't want to get out the life. And just like Yogi was said to be Meech's assistant, that's basically what Tina's been doing, handling whatever Meech needs done, whether it's finding new contacts, helping with the music label, or putting her ear to the street to get information. But at the same time, right now, Tina's really the only person in Atlanta who's in the life that Meech can depend on and trust. So with that said, one thing we're definitely going to see happen moving forward if the series continues is Meech building a new crew. And that will also be something that T's going to start doing also. And he'll eventually rebrand his crew as 263. Keep in mind, BMF grew to the point where it was said they had over 500 members around the country. But just last episode, when Meech and T were arguing, part of it was about neither really having a crew at this point, T being so desperate that he brought back in B Mickey, and how all Meech's people were either dead or in prison. So moving forward, Meech and T will each begin to build up their own crew, and part of that will take place with the West Coast expansion, and with Meech's connection to the LA Crips, and Mau, who I believe is portraying Wayne Joyner. Then also building up a new crew in Atlanta and getting that pipeline back up and running again. And there you have it. Leave your thoughts, theories, and predictions in the comments.